In 10 years, I have carried over 300 coffins, including yin coffins, yang coffins, suspended coffins, secondary coffins, and blunt coffins. I have experienced some strange and bizarre things, but in the end, I found I would like to remind those who look down on coffins to not view our industry with strange eyes. We are also human beings and have our own dignity. P.S. The new book I Built a Heavenly Palace has started serialization, and I hope everyone can support it. Keywords of the novel. My Master Chang Wudi pop-up window, My Master Chang Wudi TXT complete collection download, My Master Chang Wudi latest chapter reading. Chapter 1. I am the 8 Immortals. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. I am the 8 Immortals. For 5,000 years, China has been known for its charming figures like stars. Since the Eastern Han Dynasty, people have been divided into 3 classes. Upper, middle, and lower, with the upper being noble, middle being common people, and lower being poor. The industry has been divided into 8 classes, with 1 official, 2 officials, 3 monks, 4 Taoist priests, 5 doctors, 6 workers, 7 craftsmen, and 8 prostitutes. According to the perspective of the Eastern Han Dynasty, I don't know where to rank myself, because I am just a small person and the work I do is also considered very lowly by others. The coffin lifter, in just 3 words, expresses the bitterness and desolation of many colleagues, and I am one of the few coffin lifters in China. The title of coffiner is given to us by outsiders. In our circle, we like to refer to ourselves as the 8 Immortals, the 8 Great Vajras, and the coffins as the Dragon Coffin or Dragon Coffin. Only in this way can we feel that our industry is sacred and indispensable. The so-called coffin bearer refers to the person who carries the coffin, without much profound knowledge, as long as they have enough strength. The key is to lift the coffin. Lifting the coffin is a technical job. If you don't have the skills, a coffin can crush a person alive, and even if you can't crush them, you will be permanently disabled. The deceased may even come to you for trouble, and may even cause a fatal accident. I am from Hunan, born on March 19, 1987 in a poor village. My parents have little education, so my name doesn't sound very nice. Speaking it out may make a joke. I gave myself a stage name, Chenjiu, which means aged wine. My peers often ask me, why not call it Chenba, Chen Nian Lao Wang Ba? Usually, people who give face will call them Jioga, those who don't give face will call them coffin bearers, and those who are cultured will call them Chenbaxian. I have been carrying coffins since I was 18 years old. I am 28 years old this year. During these 10 years, I have been to Guangdong, Yunnan, Guizhou, Hunan, Sichuan and other places. I have carried more than 300 coffins, including yin coffins, yang coffins, hanging coffins, secondary coffins, and so on. One time, I even carried a blunt coffin that is rare in 100 years, which almost killed me. The story starts with me entering the profession of 8 Immortals. At that time, when I was 18 years old, my mother fell seriously ill and spent the only 3,000 yuan left at home. Unable to afford my education, I had to give up my studies and return to the countryside to work. Like all young people nowadays, I always fantasize about one day starting a company, going public again, catching up with Jack Ma, and competing against Carlos. The cruel reality tells me that in this village where birds don't shit, wanting to get into a company is like setting off firecrackers on a plane, just daydreaming. My father saw that eating dry food at home was not an end, so he looked for people to take me south to Guangzhou to make a living. No one was willing to take a young boy to work, so I stayed idle at home for 3 months. Day by day, our family's finances became increasingly tight, and we seemed to have no money to buy medicine for our mother. In the end, my father asked me cruelly whether he was willing to carry the coffin. People are going crazy when they are poor, and concepts such as integrity and morality are no longer important, let alone carrying coffins. Therefore, I agreed without thinking about it. My father took the only 30 or so eggs left at home and took me to find a neighbor named Lao Wang, asking him to take me into the industry. Speaking of this old Wang, he actually has some connection with my family. He is the son-in-law of my grandmother's sister, in his 50s, with a Chinese-style face and a bearded face. His left eye was blinded by a stone explosion earlier, and he is known as a one-eyed dragon. In general, when doing household chores in rural areas, people in the village are asked to carry coffins. With the development of the economy, more and more people are going out to work, leaving only the elderly and young in the village. Only a few hardworking men are left, which is why the profession of 8 Immortals has emerged. With my young and strong young army joining, old Wang naturally did not refuse. The 30 or so eggs that his father sent him were not considered complete. Instead, he sent dozens of eggs to his father, saying it was to thank him for his support of the 8 Immortals profession. Some things seem to have been predetermined in the dark. On the second day between me and Lao Wang, something happened in our village, which was lifting double coffins. In ancient times, these 2 coffins were a treatment enjoyed by wealthy families. It talked about 2 coffins for a deceased person, one big and one small. The deceased was placed in a small coffin, and then the small coffin was placed in a large coffin, also known as a coffin. The small one was called a coffin, and the large one was called a coffin. However, the double coffins in our village are 2 couples who have just turned 30 and slept together, which is fundamentally different from the double coffins in ancient times. This couple is the richest in our village. They moved their household registration out a few years ago and heard that they started a company in the city. No one knows exactly what company they started, but they know that they are very wealthy and have a house and a car in the city. Their cause of death is somewhat embarrassing. Some people say that the woman saw the man Bao Shaosan and poisoned him with rat poison in the food, and then committed suicide herself. Some people also say that when the man saw the woman looking for Xiao Bai Lian, he poisoned her with rat poison in the food, and then was found out by her Xiao Bai Lian and killed her again. I am not interested in a specific way of dying. After all, the thoughts of wealthy people are not what ordinary people like me can think of. After the couple's death, they left behind an elderly man in his 70s and a 3-year-old boy. In order to bring the couple back to their roots, the old man transported their bodies. The elderly person roughly explained some reasons to the elders in our village and was preparing to bury this couple in our village. According to the rules in the countryside, people whose household registration has been relocated are not allowed to be buried on the land in the village. The villagers consider that it is pitiful for the elderly to have white-haired people give black-haired people away, and agree to bury the couple in our village. However, they are afraid of damaging the feng shui of the village, and it is strictly prohibited for the elderly to ask Taoist priests to help the deceased exceed the limit. The old man built a temporary mourning hall at the entrance of the village. Due to his hurried return, the old man did not buy a coffin for the couple. Instead, he found a thin-skinned coffin in our village and placed their bodies in it. He also asked someone to dig a tomb in a cemetery not far from our village. Our village only gave him one piece of land to bury the deceased. Immediately after, the elderly person entrusted the village chief to help find someone to lift the coffin, and the salary was not stingy, twice as high as usual, opening 200 yuan. Our village is 180 miles away, and all the 8 Immortals combined are only about 20 people. When they hear that they want to lift the coffin of a wrongly killed person, they all say it is difficult to lift and are unwilling to go. Helpless, the old man raised the price of carrying the coffin to 501 people. The saying goes that under heavy money, a brave man will emerge. The fact once again proves that the ancient saying left by our ancestors is very reasonable. At this moment, a brave man appeared, and it was old Wang who took me into the industry. I have heard from my father about the situation in the Lao Wang family. One child is currently in high school and the other is currently in college. All the tuition fees are earned by Lao Wang as an 8 Immortal. When encountering such a good thing, he naturally will not let it go. At around 10 o'clock that evening, old Wang knocked on my door and said, "Jiazi, there are still fewer people than the 8 Immortals. Are you going? Upon hearing these words, the father quickly invited old Wang in, poured him a glass of sugar and hot water, and said, "Old Wang, I heard that the couple was wrongly killed. Jiazi is a newcomer, will anything happen?" Lao Wang took a sip of sugar-boiled water and patted his chest, saying, "I haven't carried the coffin of Moz before. I'm afraid what might happen. Don't worry, give me Jiu Yazi and bring him back intact tomorrow." After hearing what Lao Wang said, my father agreed to let me follow him to carry the coffins of my husband and wife. However, when I went out, my father pulled me to burn a lot of paper money at the ancestral tablet and gave me countless reminders and instructions before letting me leave. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Breaking the Dragon Rope Together. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. Breaking the Dragon Rope Together. The Lingtang is located at the entrance of the village, while my home is at the west end of the village. On the way there, I have to pass through several narrow and bumpy paths. Because it was my first time lifting the coffin, I was particularly nervous. Several times, I almost fell into the field, but fortunately, old Wang held on to me. On the way, old Wang told me some tips for carrying coffins. Firstly, don't get up first. Wait for everyone to shout 1, 2, or 3 times before getting up. Secondly, when walking on mountain roads, the dragon frame should not be off your shoulder, otherwise it will anger the deceased. Due to time constraints, he did not accuse me of more things. Longjia is a layman's term, and laymen call it morning jia. When we arrived at the Lingtang, the outer frame of the Lingtang was built with blue plastic pads, and above the main entrance was a white background with black lettering on it. A pair of elegy couplets hung on both sides, saying, "The sound of sorrow cannot be contained, and the sound of crying follows the wild cranes flying." In the middle of the funeral hall is a table, on which are the portraits of the couple and some candle ingots. Behind the table is a large black coffin, whose surface appears shiny with oil and wax under the light of the candles. Although I have received higher education and believe that there are no ghosts or gods in this world, I still feel anxious in the face of that pitch-black coffin. The old man was sitting in front of the coffin with his child, sobbing. When he saw us go, he gave each of us a red envelope, a pack of 10 yuan white sand smoke, a white handkerchief, and a pair of new shoes. He said, "Old Wang, please kindly lift this coffin well, so that my son and his wife can walk the last journey safely." Lao Wang smiled and said, "Don't worry, my leader, the 8 Immortals, has been carrying the coffin for over 10 years and nothing has happened yet." The old man breathed a sigh of relief upon hearing these words, looked up at me with a surprised expression on his face, but remained silent, holding the child and guarding the coffin. Quickly, several 8 Immortals came one after another, all of whom were acquaintances. Counting them, there were a total of 8 people, including myself. The lively atmosphere diluted some of my fears. Those 8 Immortals were very friendly when they saw me. They asked questions and taught me some of their virtues in carrying coffins. They told me not to be afraid, saying that carrying dragon coffins is a good deed, and ghosts and gods generally do not provoke us. Upon hearing their words, the last bit of fear in my heart dissipated and I quickly became one with them, talking and laughing, not like a funeral at all, but rather like a vegetable market. What surprised me was that the elderly not only did not stop, but also kept thanking us. Later, old Wang told me that the 8 Immortals saw that the spiritual hall was unusually deserted, and their master, who was getting old, had a child guarding the hall. It was pitiful, so they planned to cause a funeral for the couple and create a lively atmosphere, so that they could leave happily. Because the next day at around 3 o'clock, the coffin will be lifted out of the house, and we cannot sleep that night. We have to stand by the coffin, saying it is to communicate emotions with the souls of the deceased. Young people have a heavy sleep, and in the first half of the night, everyone was chatting and knocking on melon seeds. However, in the second half of the night, everyone was feeling tired, and I felt my eyelids fighting. Several times, I almost fell asleep, and old Wang shook me up and accompanied me to smoke a smoky cigarette. In the long wait, we finally managed to endure until the last hour. Lao Wang was the main person responsible for carrying the coffin this time, and he was in charge of many things. He also had a high reputation among the 8 immortals. When he first arrived at Mao, he took out a few thick ropes and asked each of us to take some paper money and wet it with water, placing it in their respective positions to be carried. I was assigned to the left side of the tail of the coffin. As soon as I stood there, I saw a mouse nibbling on the bottom of the coffin. Seeing me coming, the mouse was not afraid at all. Instead, it gave me a spiritual glance and continued to nibble on the coffin. I stomped hard on the ground and scared the mouse away. The sound was heard by old Wang. He glanced at me and said, "Jiazi, what are you doing?" I said there are mice gnawing on the coffin. Old Wang didn't say anything, so he asked me to prepare the paper money. Otherwise, if we miss the time, the deceased won't rest in peace, and Yan Wangye won't take them in. They will become lonely souls and ghosts, causing harm to the world. Startled by old Wang, I quickly placed the paper money and tied the handkerchief that my master had given me on my arm. After a while, he came to me and said, "Jiazi, the 8 immortals all say you are a newcomer and ask you to lift this tail. After finishing, remember to send them cigarettes as a token of gratitude." I have some doubts. In theory, when lifting a coffin up a mountain, the gravity is always at the tail end. Why do they ask me to lift the tail end but say they are taking care of me? I asked the doubts in my heart. Lao Wang smiled and said, "Before carrying the coffin up the mountain, go out and take 3 turns. This is a testament left by our ancestors. After 3 turns, the head will turn into the tail." In the coffin lifting industry, there is a saying that once the coffin is lifted, it cannot be allowed to land until the tomb. Our village cemetery is a bit far from the village entrance, so old Wang asked the elderly to bring 2 long wooden benches with them so that we can rest. After getting ready to lift the coffin, old Wang glanced at me and said, "Don't be afraid." He stretched his throat and shouted, "Get ready to drive." With this sound, I bent down and placed the dragon frame on my shoulder. I kept in mind old Wang's words and couldn't straighten my waist first, waiting for him to shout slogans. Yao, 2, 3, take off. We, the 8 immortals, shoulder to shoulder, clasped each other's shoulders, made stakes, and worked together to slowly lift the coffin. I never imagined that a coffin would be so heavy, causing my legs to tremble slightly and almost making me unable to straighten up. But for that 500 yuan, I gritted my teeth and endured it. I attached one hand to the dragon rack and the other pressed my waist, making my waist as straight as possible. At that time, it was the peak of summer, and the silver moonlight shone on the ground, illuminating the entire hall. We could clearly see the road surface. We didn't use any lighting tools and walked slowly towards the village, carrying coffins. The old man followed behind with 2 long wooden benches. The little boy was either young or had already shed tears. He didn't cry all the way. If it weren't for the existence of coffins, it would be difficult for outsiders to see us being buried. I thought I could easily earn $500 by lifting the coffin this time, but when I reached the foot of the mountain, there was an accident. According to the custom left by our ancestors, we need to rotate 3 times before going up the mountain, and accidents happen in the rotation. There is nothing wrong with the first 2 circles. When we first rotate the 3rd circle, for some reason, there seems to be something extra inside the coffin, making it exceptionally heavy. I thought I was the only one who had this feeling. Looking up at the old Wang and others, I noticed that their faces had turned pig liver color. Obviously, the weight they were bearing was the same as mine. Suddenly, with a loud bang, all the dragon ropes were broken, and the coffin slammed to the ground, making a piercing sound. Someone shouted, "Fake corpse." I was so scared that the 8 immortals knelt down on the ground and kept kowtowing to the coffin. At that time, I didn't know if I was scared or what was going on. I felt my legs trembling and wanted to kneel down like the 8 immortals, but I found that my legs didn't listen to commands and stood at the end of the coffin in a daze. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Someone inside the coffin. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. Someone inside the coffin. After several seconds, the whole scene fell into a deathly silence, with needles falling and silver moonlight shining on the coffin, reflecting a dazzling light that was particularly dazzling. Suddenly, I heard a chilling sound coming from inside the coffin, pa pa pa, as if someone was knocking on the coffin. In an instant, I only felt a chill rising from the soles of my feet, all the way up to my heart. My hands and feet were weak, my brain was blank, and I just wanted to leave here early. The sound seemed to penetrate my thoughts, and the tight, pa pa pa, sound grew faster and faster, pressing tightly against the strings of my heart. I looked around the coffin and saw the 8 immortals and the master kneeling on the ground. There were no other people around the coffin, but the pa 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 sound was very clear to me, definitely coming from the coffin. I felt a thump in my heart. It was over, I must have encountered a ghost. I began to feel scared from the bottom of my heart, and my palms were covered in sweat. Lao Wang grabbed my clothes and pulled them hard, making me kneel on the ground. Jiazi, what are you doing? Hurry up and kneel down and kowtow. I trembled and told him intermittently, Old Wang, someone knocked on the coffin. It's okay not to speak, but as soon as I spoke, a cool breeze seeped into my mouth, making me shiver uncontrollably. Old Wang listened to my words and didn't dare to neglect them. He leaned over to the coffin and his face changed suddenly. He pulled me up and said, No, there are live people inside the coffin. Hurry up and open the library to save them. Isn't it? How could a living person be inside a coffin? I asked in confusion. Old Wang glanced at the coffin and ignored me. Instead, he shouted to the 8 immortals, Don't kneel, everyone. It's important to open the museum and save people. Upon hearing this, the 8 immortals immediately stood up, patted the dust off their bodies, and surrounded the coffin. With all their movements, they pried open a hole in the lid of the coffin. First, a fair hand reached out and struggled helplessly in the air, leaving some sawdust on their nails. Then, a weak cry for help came out, Help me. Upon hearing this voice, my tense heart finally relaxed and I asked the question just now. He took a puff of his cigarette and said, Jiazi, there is still a lot you need to learn. This situation is called fake death. After becoming the 8 immortals, you must pay attention to this situation, otherwise you will bury the living, which is the sin of our 8 immortals. I also asked about some matters related to Lao Wang, and he told me that there are many complex rituals after a person's death. Generally, they are divided into small funeral, mourning, entering the funeral, ceasing the spirit, causing a funeral, guarding the spirit, large funeral, breaking the evil spirit, opening the way, going out for funeral, going down for burial, returning to the spirit, marching the fire, calming the spirit, round tomb, and the first 7. And because the couple died unjustly, many rituals were ignored. On the day of their death, they were brought to our village, and the bodies were only parked for one night before being prepared for burial. Fortunately, Old Wang experienced the old ways, otherwise the man would have been buried alive. With this interlude, the happiest thing was none other than the old man. He saw his own son die and resurrect, and added 200 yuan to each of us, the 8 immortals, as a life-saving money. Originally, Old Wang refused to take it all, but later it was too much to accept, so he accepted it. The so-called selling people's money for their lives refers to us 8 immortals. After receiving the money, we will send the elderly and the resurrected man back to the village, and let the little boy follow us for burial. After all, the woman inside the coffin is the little boy's mother, and it is a custom for him to be buried. We were busy again, covering the coffin lid and burning some candles and ingots in front of it. We tied the dragon frame and carried the coffin straight to the tomb. In theory, if one person is missing from the coffin, its weight should have become lighter. However, in reality, the opposite is true. We didn't feel the lightness, but instead felt that the coffin was heavier than before. We all carried our coffins with our heads closed all the way, and no one expressed their doubts. We just wanted the coffins to be buried as soon as possible. When I arrived at the cemetery, the moon was already in the west, and the sky was gradually becoming a bit dark. Several crows were circling in the air, making desolate calls that were particularly piercing. An inexplicable sense of oppression hit me, and the moment the coffin landed, this sense of oppression became even stronger, making me feel suffocated. Old Wang brought a few torches to light and inserted them around the tomb, making the previously dark environment brighter. He took out his phone and looked at the time, saying, "There is still half an hour until the burial. Everyone, take a break and smoke." He then sent us each a cigarette. I took the cigarette and sat down next to Old Wang, saying, "Old Wang, my heart is inexplicably a bit desolate. What's going on?" He smiled and said, "The first time I lift a coffin, it must be a bit rough. I'll get used to it in the future. Don't be so scared that you wet your pants." His words made the 8 immortals burst into laughter, and I didn't care either. After all, they were all my predecessors, so I suppressed the doubts in my heart. After resting for a while, the tomb of the old dynasty scattered some yellow paper, tea, grains, unpeeled rice, salt and wheat, and said a few strange words. The content was as follows. In Aozi village, Dongxing town, the Lu family of the royal family is buried here. We earnestly request that all ghosts and gods take care of some of them. After speaking, Old Wang clasped his fists and bowed 3 times towards the east, then instructed us to pull off the towel from our arms. At the moment we pulled off the towel, strictly speaking, it was the moment I pulled it off, and something strange happened. I only heard the little boy reach out and point to the grave, screaming, "Mom, there's a monster." I followed the little boy's finger and saw a terrifying little hole in the grave at some point, with countless ants emerging from the hole. These ants are indescribably strange. They are the size of their thumbs, with a green and blue color, and emit a pale fluorescence, like fireflies at night. When they see us fiercely pounce, they scare us all and scream. They drop their handkerchiefs and run away. In just a few seconds, they run behind Old Wang, who is the backbone in our hearts. Old Wang's face darkened and he cursed loudly, "Look at your cowardly behavior. You're just bigger ants. What's so scary about them? Hurry up and kill them." The 8 immortals stood trembling behind Old Wang, hesitant to step forward. They twisted Old Wang's angry teeth and pointed at the 8 immortals, cursing, delaying the auspicious time, "Let's see if the deceased is causing trouble for you." As soon as these words were spoken, the 8 immortals looked at me and I looked at you. If the deceased really came to cause trouble, it wouldn't be a joke. They picked up the hoe left by digging the tomb from the ground and walked towards it. I froze in place for a while, neither up nor down. With a final grit of my teeth, I picked up a hoe and followed the footsteps of the 8 immortals, without any movement. I aimed at those strange ants and smashed them over, only to hear a constant bang and sparks splattering. Those ants seemed to be made of iron, and when they were struck with a hoe, they made a resounding sound. Not only did they not die, but they fell into the soil. I didn't care too much about it, so I caught those ants and beat them hard. A few brave 8 immortals even used torches to fiercely sweep towards the ant cave. Although the ants were fierce, fortunately we 8 immortals were more united. After a brave struggle, the strange ants finally couldn't resist and scattered and fled. "Jiazi, come and see what this is." I just put down my hoe when I heard Old Wang's voice. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. 6 Ding Six Jia. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4 6 Ding Six Jia. As soon as I heard it, I thought there was something good, so I quickly stood up and jumped down from the tomb. Upon seeing it, Old Wang was holding a piece of yellow hemp paper about the size of a palm. The front part had been burned down, and there were some incomprehensible Hanli fonts written on it. Generally, I could only recognize two characters, 6 and 6. Due to the limitations of input methods, the 6 types of Hanli cannot be typed and can only be simplified. I took the jute paper and looked at it for a while, then froze for a while. What is this? In terms of appearance, it should be an antique. I frowned and told old Wang the 2 words I knew, asking him if there was anything called 6 or 6 in ancient times. 6 what, 6 what? Old Wang was stunned for a moment, pondered for a moment, slapped his thigh with a particularly excited tone, and said, is it 6 Ding and 6 Jia? The 8 immortals present were all illiterate, and the one who could read the most was old Wang. However, he only knew the 4 words, big, up, down, and heaven. The only one with high knowledge was none other than me, so old Wang threw the question at me again. When I heard the word 6 Ding and 6 Jia, I was completely confused. When I was studying, my favorite thing was history. Among historical figures, the one I admired the most was Zhuge Liang. He knew 3 parts of the world before leaving the thatched cottage, setting fire to Huluyu, capturing Menghua 7 times, leaving Qishan 6 times, and retreating Sima Yi in the empty city. I can even recite these plots backwards. Among them, a sentence from Zhou Yu and Sima Yi made my admiration for Zhuge Liang even more insane. They said, Kong Ming is a stranger and knows the 6 Ding and 6 armor demon technique. It is precisely this sentence that made me disinterested in my studies during high school and solely focused on finding the ancient book Lu Ding and Liujia. I once searched for information about Lu Ding and Liujia in various libraries, but in the end, I received very little. Unexpectedly, at this moment, the ancient book of Lu Ding and Liujia was right in front of me. This feeling cannot be understood by outsiders. Lao Wang, can I have this thing as a gift? I suppressed my excitement and tried to keep my tone calm. The 8 immortals are all from the old martial arts world. How could my expression as a young boy deceive their eyes? The old king nodded as agreeing, but as a condition, he asked me to tell them about the 6 Ding and 6 Jia matters. When I saw that the 8 immortals were interested in listening to the stories of the 6 Ding and 6 Jia, I was very happy. When I was in school, I was obsessed with the 6 Ding and 6 Jia, and often told my classmates that this ancient book must exist. However, those grandsons all mocked me, saying that the 6 Ding and 6 Jia were fabricated by Qin Shou in Records of the 3 Kingdoms, asking me not to build airplanes in earthen buildings and have unrealistic ideas. Because of this, my relationship with my classmates has become very strained. If I could have done all my classmates on my own, I have no doubt that I would have beaten them up. In the 2nd semester of high school, even my girlfriend who had been talking for more than a year was poached because of the 6 Ding 6 Jia incident. It's really frustrating. Watching the 8 immortals look at me with a puzzled expression on their faces, I almost cried. After so many years, I finally found my kindred spirit. Long drought meets a sweet rain. I took out a cigarette and lit it, took a few deep breaths, and told them that there have always been 5 teachings in Chinese metaphysics. Shan, Yi, Ming, Bu, and Xiang, all of which originate from the Book of Changes. There are not many mystical books that have evolved from the Book of Changes, among which Qimen Duanjia, Plum Blossom Yi Shu, Sanming Tong, Beidou Jin Jing, and Tai Shen Shu are the most famous. Books like Lu Ding Liujia, if it weren't for Zhuge Liang, would have been lost in the long river of history. The 6 Ding and 6 Jia are somewhat unique in the 5 arts, involving a wide range of aspects. All of the 5 arts have some knowledge of them. Based on my judgment, I have divided them into the phases of the 5 arts. The so-called phases are further divided into several types, including imprinting, naming, human, family, tomb, and character phases. For example, what Zhuge Liang learned was naming. And the yellow hemp paper in Lao Wang's hand is actually a part of the 6 Ding 6 Jia, the burial scripture, and does not mention the 5 arts of Xuanxue at all. Of course, many people have different opinions on the 6 Ding and 6 Jia gods. Some people say that the 6 Ding and 6 Jia gods are actually a combination of the 6 Ding and 6 Jia gods. According to the Taoist scriptures, they were originally generals of Emperor Zhongwu, but later they were often enslaved by Taoist priests. Some people also say that Luding Liujia is a formation and a treasure of Maoshan sect. It is rumored that Lu Hunkang, a member of Maoshan sect, was highly respected by Huizong and ordered the expansion of the Yuanfu temple in Maoshan to become the Yuanfu Wanning Palace. He also gave Lu Hunkang a jade seal and sword, as well as a handwritten Liujia Shenfu. As for what is said in Records of the Three Kingdoms, Zhuge Liang's understanding of the 6 Ding and 6 armor demon laws was only seen as a tone word by the author in the eyes of those old professors, without any historical basis. Is that really the case? Old Wang looked at me and asked. To be honest, if it weren't for the yellow hemp paper in front of me, I wouldn't have had any confidence in my heart. But now, with full confidence, I nodded fiercely and said, I believe in my own judgment. Here you are. Old Wang took a puff of cigarette and threw the jute paper at me, saying, since this piece of paper is about funerals and we rough men can't read, I'll give it to you. You little one, you must learn from your ancestors. In the future, the 8 Immortals industry will rely on your young people. Otherwise, after our old bones die, no one will lift this coffin. I took the yellow hemp paper, took off my clothes, carefully wrapped it in yellow hemp paper, and gently placed it on the ground, afraid that it would be the most damaged. The 8 Immortals laughed heartily at this scene. Xiao Mozi, it's almost dawn. Hurry up and bury the dragon coffin. Old Wang scolded with a smile and led the 8 Immortals to lift the coffin slightly, slowly moving towards the tomb. After moving to the tomb, we cannot lift the coffin with our shoulders, we can only use our hands to support the very end of the dragon frame. This dragon frame is the most laborious work, and if we are not careful, our arms will dislocate. I carefully supported the dragon frame, and the veins on my arms bulged out, looking very ferocious. This money is really not easy to earn. After a lot of effort, the coffin was finally placed in the tomb. Old Wang asked us 8 Immortals to turn around and let the little boy kneel in the tomb, burning some yellow paper. He also asked the little boy to hold a handful of soil and sprinkle it on the coffin. Then, Old Wang killed a rooster, smeared chicken blood on the coffin, and finally asked us to cover the coffin with soil. When we piled up the tomb, it was already daylight. Old Wang and the other 8 Immortals, exhausted and weak, sat on the ground, smoking heavily. I didn't have their leisurely demeanor, so I put down my hoe and picked up jute paper to study. As soon as I bent down, I smelled a very strange smell, like the stench of dead fish and dead cat carcasses rotting, making me nauseous. Then, with a buzzing sound in my head, my body slammed heavily onto the ground, my limbs twitching incessantly, and foam sprayed out of my mouth, wanting to speak for help, only to find that my throat seemed to be choked and I couldn't make a sound. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Zhongxie. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. Zhongxie. This scene startled Old Wang and others. Old Wang wrapped me in his arms, pinched me hard, and said urgently, Jiazi, you're so scared. Don't scare me. Isn't it that you have fallen into evil? Said the nearby Immortals. Upon hearing these words, Old Wang's face tightened. He took out a piece of nanmu and punched my pussy a few times, saying, this is too evil. Hurry up and bring it back to the village. Please come and take a look, old scholar. The old scholar in Lao Wang's mouth is a famous lazy man in our village, and also the only one who knows how to act. He is almost 100 years old and has a particularly strong body. When he was young, he was determined to learn Taoism and refused to work. However, when he did not succeed in Taoism, he passed the age of marriage and became single for a lifetime. His life was extremely poor and destitute, and he relied on the support of the villagers in our village to survive. Fortunately, Lao Xiuzai usually reads a lot of books and knows more about nature. When there are people in our village who hold red and white celebrations, they always like to ask him to find an auspicious day and occasionally invite him to look at feng shui. He also happens to use this as a way to have a tooth ceremony. As for the title of scholar, according to his own account, he was a scholar during the Xiantong period. However, his fate was thin, and it was only after the fall of the Qing dynasty that he lost his fame. The people in our village also have mixed opinions about this. However, as we see him getting older and don't want to argue with him, we acknowledge his status as a scholar. Old Wang and a group of 8 immortals carried me back to the village. As soon as my father saw my situation, he burst into tears. He dared not let his mother know about my situation, so he carried me directly to the door of the old scholar. However, my father was a reasonable person and did not blame old Wang. Instead, he comforted old Wang and told him not to blame himself. He also expressed gratitude to the other 8 immortals and advised them to leave, leaving old Wang to assist. The door of the old scholar's house was tightly closed, and inside came the unique and extraordinary voice of the old scholar. The father heard this sound and immediately became angry. His son's life and death are unknown now, and the old man still has the interest to think about this. Ignoring Lao Wang's tug, he kicked the wooden door against the doorstep. The door was already very old and couldn't withstand his father's kick. With a loud bang, a hole broke through it. Perhaps it was because my father had caused too much commotion. As soon as I stepped down, voices could be heard in the courtyard of the old scholar. It was the voice of the old scholar. Witch Turtle Son, knock on the door of the devil in broad daylight. In no time, the old scholar came to the front door and saw that his own door had been kicked and he didn't say anything. He turned around and returned home. In less than a minute, he angrily ran over with a firewood knife and said, "Chendazhuang, you son of a turtle. What's wrong with me? How dare I crack down on my doorstep? I see that I have killed you today, you rascal." Seeing the old scholar holding a firewood knife, his father felt discouraged and knelt in front of him with his head down. He said, "Old scholar, you must save my 9 sons." He's foaming at the mouth when lifting the coffin. "Are you here to invite me, or are you planning to kill someone to silence me?" Father slammed his door, causing the old scholar to be resentful, so his tone was not so good. Old Wang quickly walked forward and took down the firewood knife from old Xiaocai's hand, saying, "Old scholar, please calm down. You are a person with real skills, don't argue with old Chen. He kicked your door because he loved his son so much. Please take a look at Jiazi. After finishing, I will fix the door for you and give you a few bottles of good wine." Upon hearing these words, the calm expression on Lao Xiaocai's face finally revealed a smile. He stroked his white beard, which was not much on his chin, and said, "You're the only one who can speak. Bring him in and show me." My father looked gratefully at old Wang, and after some effort, the 2 of them carried me inside. Old Wang then told old Xiaocai about some of the things he encountered while carrying the coffin, and even truthfully explained the Ding Six Jia incident. After listening, the old scholar nodded and pondered for a moment before cursing, "Cyclops, you're trying to kill someone. It's fortunate that you've carried so many coffins, why don't you have any common sense? Do you know the birth date and 8 characters of the deceased? Do you know which zodiac signs are in conflict with the deceased? I think you've fallen into the trap of money." After cursing but still unable to relieve his anger, old Xiaocai picked up a stick and threw it at old Wang, hitting him hard. Old Wang didn't get angry either. He knelt down with a loud thud and said, "The burial was too urgent. I didn't come to ask you. I'm sorry to old Chen, I'm sorry to Jiazi." He burst into tears. Father helped old Wang up and nervously looked at old Xiaocai, asking, "What is there to save Jiazi?" Lao Xiaocai glared at his father and Lao Wang, asking him to prepare half a bucket of rice patties and stir with half a bucket of urine. My father dared not neglect me. He quickly brought these things and the whole room was filled with a foul smell. The old scholar then ordered my father to drip that thing off my head. Strange to say, as the feces dripped onto my head, I woke up leisurely and slowly opened my eyes. The first thing I saw was old Wang's haggard face, followed by my father's slightly swollen eyes. When my eyes made eye contact with them, their expressions immediately turned into surprises. "Wake up, wake up." My head was a bit groggy and I felt like I was collapsing. I didn't even have the strength to lift my hand, so I asked weakly, "Why? Is it so smelly?" Lao Wang was about to say something when he was stopped by Lao Xiuzai. He said, "Cyclops, you need to take care of the evil you have caused yourself. Go to the cemetery and dig up a new grave, then pour a few buckets of feces into the tomb. Otherwise, the deceased will still cause trouble for Jiazi. If we do this, the tomb will be abandoned. Isn't it a bit extreme?" After hearing this, old Wang asked with uncertainty. The old scholar glared at him and said, "This is the only way. Do it or not, it's up to you. I have no other choice." I don't know if Lao Wang used feces to fill the tomb, but I knew that night I dreamt of a woman with a fierce face who demanded her life from me, saying that I would make her feel uneasy after she died, and sooner or later she would suffer retribution. The next day, my father took me to visit the old scholar with 2 bottles of baijiu to express his gratitude. I don't know what happened, but the old scholar declined. You know, he usually likes drinking. Later, I heard from Lao Wang that the baijiu he sent was also rejected by the old scholar. My father thought that the old scholar disliked the ceremony and didn't pay enough. He took the 700 yuan I earned from carrying the coffin to the town. Apart from the money to buy medicine for my mother, he still had about 200 yuan left. He bought 2 bottles of high-end baijiu, which was said to be high-end, but in fact, it was about 20 yuan a bottle of baijiu. But for my family, this wine was really the most high-end baijiu. However, the old scholar was too lazy to open the door this time, so he sent his father away. Although his father was a bit grumpy sometimes, he was a kind man. He thought he owed the old scholar a life, and he must give something to be reassured. So he let me squat at the door of the old scholar and told me to send the high-grade baijiu to the old scholar. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Overnight in Cemetery. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6. Overnight in cemetery. For 5 consecutive days, I squatted at the door of the old scholar until the morning of the 6th day when he opened the door. I quickly stood up and walked in, kneeling down without saying a word. To be honest, I used to look down on the old scholar, but he saved my life. This kneeling is deserved. The old scholar helped me up and glanced at me, saying, "Jiazi, I can't take this wine. If I take it, it will ruin my life. If you really want to thank me, just lend me that piece of yellow hemp paper to take a look." Not to mention borrowing a glance from him, it means borrowing him to study for a year. As long as he speaks, I will not hesitate to give it to him. I immediately took out jute paper and handed it to the old scholar. The old scholar took the jute paper, glanced at it for a while, and his face changed. He handed it over to me and said, "Jiazi, getting this thing is your lucky fate. In the future, you must make good use of this thing and not let funerals smell like copper." Listening to these words, I looked at the old scholar in disbelief. Is this still the lazy guy I know? It took me several years to recognize some Hanli characters. Based on what was recorded on the yellow hemp paper, I could only roughly guess that it was about funerals. However, after only glancing at it for a while, the old scholar knew that the yellow hemp paper recorded things like funerals, and his tone was not just speculation, but very affirmative. "You." I couldn't believe my guess. "Do you understand what's up here? What's wrong? Do you underestimate me?" The old scholar laughed and said, "I was a scholar during the Xiantong period. If it weren't for the early downfall of the Qing dynasty, I would have been able to become a juren without much effort. If I were lucky enough, I would have been able to become the top scorer. Of course, I wouldn't have been defeated by characters like this in Chinese script. As he spoke, the old scholar glanced at me again and said, "Those who are buried take advantage of life. Life is the energy that runs through one element. In the sky, it flows through six emptiness, and in the earth, all things occur. Without this energy in the sky, there is no resource for it, and in the earth, there is no difference in carrying it. Therefore, the grandeur and magnificence are connected to the collection of goods, and there is no place without it, and there is no time without luck. The bones of parents are the capital of descendants, the form of descendants, and the branches of parents. One energy corresponds roughly from the origin." The saying of Lao Xiaozai comes from the beginning of the 6 Ding and 6 Jia burial scriptures, which talks about qi. This qi is the infinite qi of Taoism, and the 6 voids refer to the 6 positions of orientation, up, down, east, south, west, and north, also known as the 6 positions. As long as this infinite qi is allowed to pass through the gathering place of the tomb, future generations can have good luck and pressure on their bodies. Like the supreme Tao Te Ching of Taoism, it also emphasizes qi. Between heaven and earth, there is only one qi. This qi refers to the infinite, commonly known as the 1 yuan qi. 1 yuan gives birth to 2 e gives birth to 4 xiang, and 4 xiang gives birth to the 8 trigrams. Most of the things left by our ancestors have similarities, except that they are all qi. However, Buddhism emphasizes Wu, the vast world, the 10 Buddhist kingdoms, which are innate and have no origin, so there is no beginning or end. It may be the introduction of Chinese land from outside, which is slightly different in theory and will not be described for the time being. You are a divine person. I was so shocked by the old scholar that I didn't know what to say, so I could only hold back one sentence. The old scholar nodded in satisfaction and enjoyed my admiration very much. He said that I was a child who could be taught and not even stronger than my father. Taking advantage of his excitement, I quickly stuffed him with a pack of cigarettes and asked him to translate the content on the jute paper for me, but he did not refuse. We stayed in the room for a whole day before finally translating the entire text, which was about 3,000 words. In the 10 years of carrying coffins, these 3,000 words saved me countless times. It can even be said that without these 3,000 words, my grave was already covered with weeds. To me, these 3,000 words are truly 1,000 words of gold. As dusk approached, as I was about to leave, the old scholar stopped me and said, "Jiazi, tonight is the 7th son of that woman. You must go to the cemetery for the night. Only after passing this hurdle can you fully adapt to the job of being a coffin bearer." I asked him why, and he said it was indescribable. If he said it, it wouldn't work. He just asked me to bring some candles and ingots to guard the grave overnight. To be honest, I have an inexplicable fear of that cemetery, and I can't say exactly what it is. I just feel that something strange will happen there. However, since the old scholar has said so, I will only listen to his instructions, and I firmly believe in his words. I said goodbye to the old scholar immediately, gave him 100 yuan and told him that it was my private money, not the money earned by carrying the coffin, so he accepted it. Until this time, I vaguely knew why the old scholar refused to accept Baijiu. He was afraid of the woman's revenge. After all, he was the one who made the idea. When I got home, I hastily picked up a few bites of food and told my father that he would spend the night at the cemetery. However, my father didn't trust me and wanted to provide me with a companion, but I refused. Because of this, I almost had an argument with my father. In the end, I brought out the words of the old scholar and added fuel to the fire before he reluctantly agreed to let me go alone. When I arrived at the cemetery, it was around 10 o'clock in the evening. I first burned some yellow paper in each grave, inserted 3 columns of fragrant incense, and then burned 7 or 8 kilograms of yellow paper in front of the woman's grave. I also burned all the candle ingots I brought to her, muttering, "The young man is not sensible. If you have offended me, please forgive me. Strange to say, there was nothing strange about burning yellow paper earlier. At midnight, for some unknown reason, the yellow paper couldn't ignite, even the previously burned candle had been extinguished. The fragrance was even more strange, clearly lit at the same time, but the degree of burning was completely different. The longer one was 1 inch higher than the shorter one. Helpless, I took out a lighter and lit those things again, but they seemed to be against me. Just as they were lit, they turned off in a few seconds, and I felt a little scared inside. At this moment, a gloomy shout came from behind me. Jiazi, Jiazi, my scalp tingled and goosebumps all over my body appeared. I took a deep breath, tried to calm down, and slowly turned my head to see what was going on. There is no one behind, no ghosts, nothing at all there is endless darkness, black like a huge hole, as if it is about to devour the entire sky. My heart is stunned. Why did the moonlight before become so dark now? I quickly swiped the lighter a few times, 1, 2, 3, and several times in a row. The lighter didn't even show any sparks, and the entire cemetery echoed with the sound of the lighter's hiss, hiss, and rapid breathing. Jiazi, Jiazi. That gloomy voice came again. This time, before the sound landed, I immediately turned my head. Still the same as before, nothing. But this time, there was a strange feeling that something was staring at me in the darkness, and my heart was furrowed with cold sweat rising from behind. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Unfair Cases. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. Unfair Cases. Suddenly, the eerie voice grew louder and louder, piercing my eardrums, causing them to crack. For a moment, I didn't know if I was unconscious or had hallucinations, and a conversation between a man and a woman faintly rang in my ears. Female. You said you loved me for a lifetime. Man, of course I love you, you are my lifelong treasure. Female. Why did you divorce me? You promised to take care of me for a lifetime, didn't you forget? Our son is so old. Man, divorce is just a temporary solution. If I don't divorce you, my mother-in-law will have to find someone to kill me. She will have someone follow you and say that once she finds you and her son, she won't easily let you two go. You know, then my mother-in-law can do anything. Wife, I'm begging you. Let's divorce. Female. So we only have to divorce. Man, wife, you have to believe that I love you, but we must divorce, otherwise you two will really be in danger of your lives. Female. What's the point of us losing you and living? Husband, do you really love me? Are you willing to die with us? Man, okay, since our family of 3 is still alive and cannot be together, why not go to the underworld and have a happy family of 3? Female. This meal contains 3 bottles of sleeping pills. After the 3 of us finish this dinner, let's meet again in the underworld. Husband, I love you. Baby, Mom loves you. Man, you eat first. I'll come with my son later. Female. Husband, I'm waiting for you in the underworld. Finally, there was a dull sound of falling to the ground and the crying of the little boy. The sound had just disappeared, and I gradually regained consciousness. Looking up, the cemetery was still that cemetery, the moon was still the moon. Is everything just a hallucination? However, hearing such a strange conversation in the cemetery, I was still very scared in my heart. I felt the fragrance on the grave like a pair of strange eyes blinking at me, just wanting to leave this terrifying cemetery as soon as possible. Suddenly, a gust of wind lifted from the grave and hit me directly. I spread my legs and prepared to run, but running was just a luxury wish. An unknown force bound my legs, making me unable to move at all. My heart was extremely scared, and I kept roaring, wanting to wake myself up a bit. But my voice didn't resonate in this eerie cemetery. Approaching, the dark wind was getting closer and closer, and I was almost scared to the point of collapse. Suddenly, My neck felt like it was being pinched by an invisible pair of hands, getting tighter and tighter, almost suffocating me. I only feel that the sky is red, the earth is red, the moon is red, the grave in front of me is red, the candle ingots, the fragrance, everything around me is all crimson. The endless crimson rushes like blood, thick and sorrowful, blocking my eyes, blocking my nose, and making it impossible for me to breathe. In the darkness, the whole world was silent, and great fear engulfed my heart. This suffocation made me almost crazy. I closed my eyes, slowly raised my hands, and could only bet that everything was an illusion. I touched the key on my body and suddenly inserted it into my thigh. 1, 2, 3, and 7 or 8 thrusts in a row, the intense pain made my head become unprecedentedly clear. I suddenly opened my eyes, and the scene before me was still the same. It is worth mentioning that there is a huge mouse crouching 1 foot behind me, its eyes shining with a faint blue light, staring at me intently. My tense nerves relaxed, my legs softened, and I sat on the ground, breathing heavily in my mouth. All I could think of was that eerie conversation. Could it be that conversation between the couple in the village just now? That man deceived the woman, did he not eat that food, or rather, did he just eat a little bit? Otherwise, how could that man possibly have been resurrected in the coffin, let alone the children of the couple who are still alive and well? So, in other words, I saved the woman's enemy, so she wants to ask me for her life. No wonder the old scholar would say, it's hard to say, but it doesn't work. Does the old scholar know something? Thinking through these things, I knelt down towards the woman's grave and kowtowed deeply. It wasn't that I begged the woman to let me go, but that I felt I owed her something. As for what I owed, I couldn't explain clearly. If I had to say it, I could only say, destroy a poor person's grave. After kowtowing my head, I remade the woman's grave and made a promise that as long as I live, I will come to pay my respects to her every Qingming festival. Even now, I still go to her grave every Qingming festival to pay my respects and sit at the grave to talk to her from the bottom of my heart. It can be considered as a way to make up for my mistake. After doing all of this well, I limped back home and didn't have the heart to deal with the wound on my thigh. Holding the translated hexagram and hexagram, I carefully read it. Since I entered the field of coffin bearers, I was determined not to let similar things happen. The next day, just as it was getting dark, I called old Wang to find out the truth about the man. However, I was told that after the woman was buried, their family left. Perhaps this is how things are. After all, life is not a novel, and not all mysteries can be answered. It wasn't until many years later that I learned about the man while carrying his coffin. He didn't end up in a bad situation and ended his life in a car accident. He was only 36 years old, and what's even more incredible is that I was able to carry his coffin. I have to say, some things are already predetermined, and even if I run away, I can only avoid them for a while. I can't avoid them for a lifetime. Remember, don't do evil, and in the end, you will only get burned. I don't know if it was my behavior that moved that woman, or for some reason. That night, I dreamt of her again. However, this time I didn't come to ask for her life, but to say goodbye, and even made a few bows to me, asking me not to feel guilty. Everything is fate. For a long time, I was silent in this incident, deeply self-blaming myself. Later, I told Lao Xiaocai about this matter, and he told me that after death, one must follow the normal procedure and take the wrong step, which will cause strange things, not to mention those who died wrongly. His words strengthened my determination to learn the 6 Ding Six Jia. The 8 immortals are not like other industries, they work from 9 to 5. Only when there are dead people can we live. At that time, I was quite conflicted. On the one hand, I hoped to lift more coffins to make money, but on the other hand, I didn't want dead people. When I had no work to do, I was just like an ordinary farmer. Apart from doing farm work at home, I just flipped through the 6 Ding Six Jia books and didn't go out to carry coffins for half a month. It's worth mentioning that during this half-month period, Lao Xiuzai praised me in front of the 8 immortals such as Lao Wang, saying that I have immortal roots and am naturally made to carry coffins. I really don't know if he praises me or harms me, but these are not important. What's important is that old Wang and the other 8 immortals have changed their gaze at me, from taking care of me before to asking me everything later on. Of course, I didn't disappoint them either. I thoroughly read the funeral scriptures of the 6 Ding and 6 Jia, and also read some books as an old scholar. I also learned some mystical things, such as selecting dates and feng shui, but I don't know much. At most, I can count it as half a bucket of water. I am not as proficient as professionals, but for the 8 immortals who only have one deadly strength, I have become their 10,086 to 0. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. White-Mouthed Wives. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8. White-Mouthed Wives. That day, while I was studying at home with my 6 Ding and 6 Jia, old Wang walked in and said, "9 Yazi, there's life now." Upon hearing these words, I didn't know whether to be happy or depressed. I replied lightly, "Young people. Or old people. This is the code of conduct for our 8 immortals. No matter what coffin we carry, we first need to know who the deceased is. The elderly have the price of the elderly, and the young have the price of the young." He said, "The old man, who is now 87 years old and has passed away, wants us to carry the coffin, but another group of fake immortals are competing for business." The so-called fake immortals refer to the villagers who died in their own village and do not belong to the industry of the 8 immortals. They only carry some elderly people who have returned to their normal sleep. When they encounter young people and people who have died abnormally, they will avoid them, and once they encounter those who have returned to their normal sleep, they want to get a share of the pie. Since the rise of the profession of 8 immortals, there have been constant disputes between fake immortals and us. Fake immortals say that we love to pretend to be hypocrites, and those who carry coffins must wear a high hat and call themselves the 8 immortals. We criticize the fake immortals for not being sensible. An ordinary person insists on participating in the affairs of the 8 immortals, in order to make some extra money, and insists on causing the deceased to die without peace. Later, for the sake of business, the fake immortals often fought with the 8 immortals. In Hengyang, they even got on the news because of this. Finally, the police station gave us a death order, asking whoever carried the coffin owner's house to the final say, and whoever dared to make trouble would be closed. Even so, the conflict between us and the fake immortals continues. Although there has not been a large-scale fight, our verbal skills are common, and it is all our 8 immortals who suffer. The reason is that we are from another village, and fake immortals are usually from our own village. Their mother-in-law is even more fierce, and they won't let us go if they catch us without scolding and peeling off our skin. There are very few particularly aggressive mother-in-law who even come to our house to scold, from the 18th generation of our ancestors to the generation of our grandchildren. No wonder they have too few ways to earn money in the countryside. Apart from occasionally building new houses and helping others earn some money, they rely on lifting coffins to make some extra money. Simply put, lifting coffins is considered a fat job in the eyes of false immortals. For half a month without any source of income, I finally came to do business. Surprisingly, someone came to grab it. I made up my mind and followed old Wang out. I spent 30 yuan to invite the most despicable widow Lu from our village to come with us. Old Wang scolded me, "Jiazi, you are too harmful." Speaking of widow Lu, her real name is Lu Qingxiu. She is 30.7 or 8 years old, with white hair all over her head and fair hair all over her body. Even her eyes are a bit pale. Some people say she is a foreigner, while others say she is a Yin person. In fact, it is a medical albinism, not the kind they say. She is famous for being 80 miles away from our village. From an 80-year-old man to a 6-year-old child, no one is afraid of her. As long as she stops there, the other person will be timid. It's definitely not because of her appearance, but because her mouth is too cunning. To what extent? Let me tell you this. Her husband was so scolded by her that he hanged himself and was given the nickname, White-Mouthed Mischievous Woman. I led Old Wang and Widow Lu to the village where the deceased was. On the way, Old Wang told me that the deceased was from Li village, named Li Huida. He had been sick for several years and couldn't catch his breath, so he returned to his ancestors for glory. Originally, Old Wang wanted to call the other 8 immortals over to strengthen his power. I said a word to him, and Old Wang dispelled the idea. I said, "Can more than 10 men be worth her?" As I glanced at Widow Lu, Old Wang nodded repeatedly and said yes. When we arrived at Li village, before we even entered the village entrance, we were stopped by a few women who started cursing, "Cyclops, you little loach. Which widow did you come to our village after? Aren't you afraid that your wife will make you kneel on the washboard?" They ignored me directly, and I was secretly delighted. Unexpectedly, Old Wang, this bastard, was deceiving me. He said, "I'm currently working with Jiazi. If you have something to tell him," and after that, the bastard even blinked at me. If it weren't for the sake of him taking me into the industry, I would really want to beat him. He said I was negative earlier, but this bastard is even more negative than me. A few aunties have something to say. I politely smiled at them. As the saying goes, if you reach out and don't hit the smiling person, I think we can resolve it peacefully. There's no need to make a big fuss. The villagers in our big hometown don't look up and don't look down, so we won't be embarrassed when we meet in the future. You cowardly child, at a young age, you didn't go to Guangzhou to find a job and even got involved in carrying coffins. You're not afraid that you won't be able to marry a wife in the future. Besides, are you in this profession worthy of your parents who raised you? Your parents raised you so much that they let you carry coffins, an older shrew scolded. As a scholar, I didn't argue with this group of rascals. I glanced at Widow Lu and said, "Auntie Lu, if I win the scolding, I'll give you an extra 10 yuan in salary." "Okay, Jiazi, Aunt Lu didn't misread you." Widow Lu walked out from behind me. I have never seen a person with such immense killing power before. When those women saw Widow Lu, they were first shocked, then involuntarily took a few steps back, and finally, as if they had seen a ghost, exclaimed in surprise, "Here comes the white-mouthed cunning woman." After finishing, their anger dissipated. The shadow of a tree, the name of a person, is this the charm of Widow Lu, which is incomparable to ordinary women. Unless they are tired of living, they will only curse at Widow Lu. I shrugged my shoulders helplessly and gave Widow Lu 40 yuan. She said, "Jiazi, when I come across this matter in the future, I will definitely not be wrong to ask my aunt. These little rascals, I scold about 10 of them, and they can stand undefeated." Okay. I nodded and asked Widow Lu to go back first and walk towards the village with Old Wang. Perhaps it was those women who spoke up about Widow Lu, but we did not face any further resistance and successfully arrived at the deceased's home. The person who received us was a middle-aged man with a Chinese face and a stool head, dressed in mourning clothes. When he saw us, he was a bit excited and said, "Old Wang, we met once. You must handle my old man's funeral well." "Definitely, definitely." Old Wang nodded. The middle-aged man invited the two of us in and brewed a pot of tea for us, saying, "Old Wang, you are also aware of my family's situation. The 3 brothers are all farming at home and have no source of income. I want to let all of you 8 immortals host this funeral. In terms of price, I hope you can give us a discount." Old Wang only knew how to lift coffins, but didn't know anything else. He looked at me and asked, "Jiazi, the old scholar praised you for having immortal roots. Do you have the ability to move on?" "All?" I asked on the side. Before Lao Wang could speak, the middle-aged man glanced at me with a surprised expression and said, "Yes, do you have this ability, young brother?" I was puzzled when I heard this. How dare I be so famous? You should know that in general funerals, the head of the household would hire some elderly experts. Such a young man, not to mention handling funerals, will be despised even when lifting coffins. How come this head of household doesn't despise me? End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Funeral Services. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9 Funeral Services. I didn't respond directly. I looked at the middle-aged man in confusion and asked the question in my heart. He said he believed in the old scholar. Upon hearing this, I probably knew something in my heart. I'm afraid this middle-aged man was financially strapped and couldn't afford to hire professionals, so he hired amateur workers at a low cost to attend the funeral. The old scholar recommended me to him. After thinking through these, I will confidently go ahead and plan an experience for nothing else. As long as there are no mistakes in the general, elderly people like this who have returned to normal sleep will generally not cause any strange things. Next, we discussed the price with the middle-aged man, but for some reason, old Wang spoke up for 15,000 yuan. Without hesitation, the middle-aged man agreed and asked us to take care of everything from the old man's burial to burial. Lao Wang also said, some necessary red envelopes need to be calculated separately. They are all rural people, and middle-aged men understand these rules. Let's not despise small red envelopes. After negotiating the price, the middle-aged man gave each of us a red envelope, a pack of 5 yuan white sand smoke, which contained 20.4 yuan. According to our local customs, these 20.4 yuan were called full filial piety, and 12 yuan was half filial piety. The size of the red envelope was entirely the wish of the host family. Some wealthy hosts would give at least 200 yuan in this red envelope. Although the red envelope was a bit smaller, old Wang and I were still quite happy. After all, this was the first time our 8 immortals had taken on a funeral order, and the price was only 3,000 yuan lower than those professionals. Later, the host invited us to cook a meal at his house. After drinking for over 30 years, old Wang and the host drank a bit too much. Old Wang said, "Old Li, I'm a bit confused. The funeral fee of 15,000 yuan is a bit low, but when we talk about the price with those professionals, it's possible to invite them. Why do we have to contract it to the 8 immortals?" After taking a sip of wine, the host was stunned for a moment and said, "Brother, I'm not hiding anything from you. Before you ask me, I'll find someone to calculate our daily lives." That person said the old man died at a bad time and the time he spent at home was a bit long. Old Wang asked for a long time, but his face changed and he said, 7 days. What? Old Wang exclaimed in surprise, 7 days. You didn't lie to me. He frowned and said, at first I didn't believe it, but later I consulted with the old scholar and he said 7 days. I glanced at the master's house and felt a bit angry in my heart. However, since I had agreed, I couldn't go back on my word. I had to hold on to old Wang, who was about to get angry, and said, "Tell me the birth date and 8 characters of the deceased, and I will calculate it later." The so-dot called 8 characters of birth, simply put, are 8 characters, which is actually another version of the 4 pillars in the Book of Changes. The 4 pillars refer to the time of a person's birth, that is, the year, month, day, and hour. The 10 heavenly stems and the 12 earthly branches each give 1 character to represent the year, month, day, and hour, respectively. The 10 heavenly stems are A, B, B, D, W, G, Gung, Xin, Ren, Gui. The 12 earthly branches are Z, Chou, Yin, Mao, Chen, Si, Wu, Wei, Shen, Yu, Su, Hai, Yin Shi and others contain the basic state of celestial body movement at the time of a person's birth, with 2 characters for each pillar and a total of 8 characters for the 4 pillars. Therefore, it is also known as the 8 characters. Based on the relationship between the generation and suppression of the 5 elements of the heavenly stem, earthly branch, Yi Han, Yin and Yang, it is speculated that a person's body is responsible for both good and bad. My master told me that the deceased's birth date was in the 7th year of the Republic of China, June 20th, at Wuxia hour, and he died at noon. At first glance, there is no problem with the birth date and 8 characters. When I calculated it using the 10 heavenly stems and 12 earthly branches, my face darkened. The 7th year of the Republic of China was in AD 1918, which was the year of Wuwu. June was the month of Wuwu, and the 20th day was the day of Wuwu. If I guessed the time correctly, it should be at Wuwu, and the time of his death should be at November 2000, noon, no more than a minute or a second. Only in this way can he meet the fate mentioned in the funeral scriptures. I was extremely unwilling to admit this in my heart, so I asked the master, did the old man die at exactly 11 o'clock? He said, I don't know, I didn't look at the time, it looks like 11 o'clock. Lao Wang was anxiously waiting on the side, asking if there was anything wrong with me. I didn't answer him, so I put down the dishes in my hand and asked him to wait for me. I went back to the village to lie down. Returning to the village, I first dug out the funeral scriptures at home and looked at them once. That's right, they met the fate mentioned above. Then, I went to ask the old scholar about the situation, and the answer he gave me was also that fate. He asked me to sincerely prepare for this funeral and carefully select the 8 immortals without any problems. When I was about to leave, the old scholar stopped me and said, Jiazi, you must choose a good tomb, don't cut off the main family's back. After he finished speaking, he sighed. It's okay if he doesn't speak. As soon as he speaks, I really want to beat up the old scholar. MD, once that kind of tragic funeral is taken over, the person in charge of the funeral will have a short lifespan of 3 years. As long as the etiquette is not thoughtful, it is easy for the deceased to think about it, and bad luck will be added in the future. MD, is there such a deceitful person? So many 8 immortals are not deceiving, catch me and bully. As I was about to leave, I had nowhere to vent my anger and kicked the door of the old scholar's house again. I didn't know if it was broken or not, but I knew there were roaring curses from behind. After knowing what kind of life the deceased had, I had no confidence in this funeral, let alone carrying the coffin. I really wanted to postpone this funeral, but I couldn't find a suitable reason, let alone according to our local customs, no one would accept the second funeral. 2 funerals. 1 funeral replaces 2 groups of people. Thinking of this, I felt a little better. I found some funeral tools at home and hurriedly walked towards Li village. Since I had taken on this funeral, I must not let any accidents happen. As for the short 3-year lifespan, it will be decades from now, so I will temporarily ignore it. After arriving at Li village, I remained calm and didn't say anything. I asked old Wang to give me all the previous red envelopes and cigarettes, but I didn't tell him the reason. Although old Wang was a bit surprised, he still gave me the red envelopes and cigarettes and asked me why. I said I wouldn't harm him, and if there was anything, I would take it on my own. Later, I asked the host to take me to the room of the deceased. The host nodded, and his eyes showed infinite sadness and sadness. It was an indescribable look, cruel and realistic. I believe the host's feelings for the deceased should be very deep. I followed behind the master with anxiety, but old Wang was not afraid at all. He swaggered in, and if I told him the fate of the deceased, I wonder if he would be the same. The house where the deceased was located was not large, about 10 square meters. Several chairs were placed on the right, and a wooden bed was placed on the left with a black mosquito net hanging on it. Beside the bed, a 7- or 8-year-old girl was kneeling and burning something. After seeing us enter, the little girl looked up and continued her work. As I approached, it wasn't yellow paper, but test papers. The most frustrating thing was that the little girl was burning them while muttering, "Grandpa, you're getting old. When you're in the underworld, use your brain more. Shuyan will burn some test papers for you. If you don't understand anything, take my homeroom teacher down and let her teach you how to do them." Hashtag 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 hashtag. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. Wiping Corpse. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10 Wiping Corpse. I couldn't help but burst out laughing. This little girl was also amazing. If her homeroom teacher knew about it, I don't know if she would be furious. The host smiled awkwardly and picked up the little girl, saying, "My daughter Li Shuyan, don't take offense, both of you." I stopped and said that this girl had a promising future. I gestured for the host to take the little girl out and looked up at the bed. I saw an elderly man with a wrinkled face lying on the bed, his face red and his eyes slightly open, revealing a gap. He was dressed in khaki canvas clothes, and his hands tightly grasped the edge of the bed. As the saying goes, living people have a living appearance, and dead people have a dead appearance. After death, most people's faces will turn green, which is commonly known as the dead appearance. However, the deceased not only does not have a dead appearance, but their faces are even more beautiful than those of living people. At the sight of this situation, before I could speak, old Wang spoke first and said, "Jiazi, this situation is a bit wrong. Will it cause trouble?" I gave a bitter smile and said, "It should be okay." Old Wang didn't say a word and leaned towards me. "When are you also afraid?" I laughed at old Wang and asked him to call the legitimate descendants of the master's family to prepare to burn the leader's collar paper. I also asked him to find several 8 Immortals coffins and bring them to the main hall. The so-called guiding paper is actually the term used in our Hunan province, commonly known as burning yellow paper. However, this burning yellow paper is somewhat different from ordinary burning yellow paper, as it needs to be burned according to a certain weight, usually 18 pounds and 8 taels. It is said to be used to buy soul-summoning envoys, but to put it bluntly, this type of yellow paper is called buying road money. I walked around the room several times, and only then did the host bring in about 10 people. The leader was the host and 2 brothers, the second row was the host's nephew, and the third row was the host's wife and his brother's wife. As soon as they arrived, I felt that there was something wrong with the atmosphere inside the room. I didn't say anything specific, but I felt that the atmosphere inside the room was very strange. If I had to describe it, I could only say that the air was not as fresh as before. I frowned and glanced at them, asking if they had taken a shower. They nodded and said, "After the old man got angry, our whole family has washed." I didn't say anything further, so I asked them to kneel at the bedside in the order of their grandchildren and daughter-in-law, and asked them to fold the yellow paper in half when burning it. They were a bit surprised, but when they saw that my face was not right and I didn't say anything, they all followed my words. The burning of the paper was inevitable, and the crying was truly shocking. It was so heartbreaking that I almost couldn't cry the house down. I quickly stopped them and said, "There are still 7 days left, don't cry yourself hoarse." This room was originally not big, and after burning the toilet paper, the smoke was shrouded in the room, making it difficult to breathe. It was only after the owner opened the window that some air was released into the room. When the air inside the house improved slightly, I asked the host to call out his children and daughter-in-law, leaving the host and his 2 brothers behind. I also asked the host to prepare half a basin of clean water and put it in the middle of the house. The host didn't dare to neglect it and quickly followed my instructions. After a while, the host brought half a basin of clean water and put it in the middle of the house. Next, I asked the host to prepare a body towel. The body towel is actually a towel, but it is slightly different from the towels used in daily life. Our custom here is to pull a piece of fabric from the clothes loved by the deceased during their lifetime, and in some places, it is the washcloth used by the deceased during their lifetime. Having prepared these 2 things, I made 3 bows to the deceased and asked the 3 brothers of the master to stand in the east, south, and north directions of the basin. I stood in the west position and put the body towel into clean water. I first turned 7 times to the left and then 8 times to the right. When the water was about to overflow from the basin, I loosened my hand and let the body towel rotate with the water flow. This action is called selecting relatives, selecting the person closest to the deceased to wipe the corpse on behalf of the deceased. In some places, wiping the corpse is called wiping decoration or giving away, while we, the 8 Immortals, call it qinglong. There is a certain risk of wiping the body. Some people may not have died yet, and later people will quickly wipe the body for the deceased. Once the deceased suddenly wakes up, the person who wiped the body will be scared to death, and it is not impossible for them to be scared to death. Although this probability is very low, it still happens occasionally. Of course, risks often come with some benefits, but these benefits greatly outweigh the risks. It is rumored that those who wipe the dead will receive the protection of the deceased. The seemingly elusive protection is a huge benefit for future generations. In order to wipe the bodies of the deceased, there are many brothers who turn against each other. Later, the mourners came up with a method of choosing a relative. With the rotation of the corpse scarf, the eyes of the 3 brothers in the main family were almost protruding, and their breathing was also rapid. However, there was an accident where the corpse scarf was parked. Specifically, it was parked in the west, facing me without bias. Seeing this scene, in my heart, I cursed the ancestors of the old scholar from the Qing dynasty to the era of the 3 emperors and 5 emperors. What kind of job did he recommend? There are benefits to wiping the body, but the premise is that the deceased's legitimate relatives. As someone who handles funerals, we do not have any ties to the deceased. Once we wipe the body, we will not receive protection, and it will be unlucky for 3 years. I glanced at the 3 brothers of the main family, smiled awkwardly, and said, "Why don't we go around again?" "No, this is the old man's wish," said the 3 brothers of the main family in unison. I just had a try-and-see attitude and didn't expect the host to agree. Helpless, I had to ask the host to find some pot-bottom ash to apply on my face, and then ask for a red envelope from the host. This is not that I love money, but rather a custom. When outsiders wipe the body of the deceased, they usually dirty their face and ask the host for a red envelope, because the ashes on the pot bottom ward off evil and the red envelope is auspicious. The host is not stingy either. He gave me a package of 24 yuan and instructed me to wipe the body of the deceased clean. I nodded and slowly took off the clothes on the deceased's body. I picked up the tissue from the basin, twisted it into a 7-part wet, and gently wiped the deceased's feet. I thought wiping the body was a very difficult thing, but as soon as I finished wiping my feet, I completely adapted to this behavior, as if it was not a corpse in front of me, but a newborn baby. This metaphor may not be appropriate, but at the time, I really felt that way. It wasn't until later that I realized there was a kind of person who was destined to deal with corpses from birth, and I was one of the best of these people, commonly known as a genius. It's just that this genius is not recognized by outsiders, and it's a bit sad. Quickly, I wiped 3/4 of the body of the deceased, leaving only the head. Now, I was a bit puzzled as the deceased's appearance was so beautiful that I didn't know how to proceed. I took a deep breath and kept reminding myself, "Chenjiu, don't be afraid. What you wipe is not the body, but doing good things. You will live a long and prosperous life in the future." Not to mention, this method really works. I suppressed my unease, twisted the corpse towel, and shook my hands to wipe it off the face of the deceased. The feeling of getting it was very gentle and warm. I gently wiped the deceased's cheeks, and every action was very gentle, afraid that one mistake would wake the deceased up. End of this chapter.